So I got the results from my first Bryan Johnson Blueprint blood work, and it looked wrong. But was this a bad draw, or was my body just trying to tell us something?
So that's the part you can't miss, because the fastest way to waste months on your health is to chase the wrong number. We could panic over noise or ignore the signal that actually matters. And if you've ever gotten a lab result that didn't match the effort you put in, you know exactly why this matters.
So yeah, this was not the clean baseline that we wanted. But before we go changing anything, we really have to take a moment to figure out what we can trust, what we should retest, and what would be a mistake to fix too soon. So if you're not familiar yet, Bryan Johnson has a new process which you can get all your blood work done. Twice a year you get your labs drawn. It's $365, $1 a day if you figured out the math. And you get it done twice a year, but you get a whole panel of things that you're not getting done from your doctor. So I got mine done, and it was not a clean baseline. We'll explain that here in just a little bit.
But we don't want to waste the money and throw away the whole result, so we need to figure out a way to make the data useful.
As it turns out, it wasn't a lab problem. It was more of a Tony problem.
Perspective matters here. If we flag every number the same way, we can end up making the wrong move way too fast.
Yeah.
We can explain away things that actually matter, or vice versa, we could panic over something that's temporary. Or we could change so many things at once that the test really becomes useless. A lab report is not a verdict, it's a question.
So the first decision was not what supplement I need to buy, what protocol I need to change, or what numbers I should be panicking over. The first decision was, how do we sort this data?
What can we trust? What needs a cleaner retest? And what would be a mistake to touch too soon?
That became the point of this blood work. Not perfect results, but better decisions.
The first place the report got complicated was the lipid section.
Yeah.
It looked kind of bad on paper. But what's important to remember is your personal triglyceride history.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's some good and some bad in this result. And the good is that my triglycerides are at one of the best numbers that they've been in over the last decade. The bad news is if you were to look at this result independently and see a number of 163 where the maximum number is supposed to be 150, you'd probably be freaking out a little bit. However, in my case, that's actually a really good result. Triglycerides are something that I have had a problem with for a long time. As a younger man, I didn't really spend the effort to try to work towards improving that. So I had to kind of go back and look and see how bad they really were over the last 10 years. And most of my numbers were in the 300 to 400s. I once had a test in the 500s, and I don't know what in the world I was doing the night before, but I actually have a test result of 930 for my triglycerides one time. So 163, also combined with my last two tests, that one of them was my best number, one of them was a little bit in between, but this is my second best number ever. However, there are some new numbers that came about during this that also are concerning and sort of relate to those triglyceride numbers.
Yeah, numbers such as your APOB, your LDL particles, those were not exactly numbers you wanted either.
So my first instinct was simply to explain away those numbers, but my second instinct was not to.
This is where the report stopped being simple. Triglycerides showed progress for you. APOB and LDL particle number still look like a possible signal. So our decision was not to panic, and it was not to celebrate. It was to respect the progress, but do not ignore the particle burden.
But lipids were the number that grabbed me at first. There was one marker on this report that hit completely different. And before we decide what we're going to do with that number, we kind of have to decide whether this was a true baseline or if this was a dirty snapshot. The numbers that were really jumping off the page had to do with my inflammation markers. And with my cancer history, that's something that's really concerning. And I also thought that I was proactively doing a very good job of taking care of inflammation, but it turns out I wasn't. I was adding cinnamon and turmeric to my shakes daily, which are natural inflammation reducers, but it turns out that I wasn't doing nearly enough.
So the metric in question is hs-CRP. This is the metric that is connected to inflammation, but it doesn't tell you automatically why your inflammation is high. It can rise when your body is fighting something, you had a little bug or something closer to the draw, so this may not be your true baseline number, but it's also not an excuse to ignore it.
Yeah, this is one of those numbers that gets a little bit questionable based on the dirty draw. So this is one of the numbers that we're not quite sure about because we did have this quote-unquote dirty draw. Because of that, it's not something that we're going to hit panic button on yet, but we're also not going to ignore it. It's one of those that we need to make some changes and then see what happens with the next draw. We're going to clean up some of the conditions and see if we can't have a better health plan going in and see if we can improve. So a couple of days before your test, they send you an email, and the email says you should fast for at least 12 hours.
At least.
At least, right? So I like to do a lot of fasting, and I was due for an extended fast. So I thought, well, if 12 hours is good, what would 3 days do? So I fasted for almost 3 days before my test, and that was part of the problem, and that was how some of our numbers were off. But then during that time, the second night of my fasting, I also got sick. Like I had a fever and chills, and I laid in bed and couldn't move. And it turns out that also compromises your test. So 3-day fast in sick conditions change a lot of your biological markers. And let me just tell you, they don't say that in the email.
They did not.
In my defense.
No, in your defense, and you are an overachiever, so there's that. Here we are. This 3-day fast, it absolutely can shift your metrics. It can change your hydration, your ketones, your lipids, your kidney markers, and your recovery signals. So the data is not useless. No. The point here is that our conditions were very unusual, so we have to be a little bit more careful in our interpretation. This was absolutely useful data, but it was not clean.
It wasn't
baseline data.
Then the question becomes, do you get another draw, or do you just kind of accept what we have figured out? And then just remember that we're making 1% changes. We're trying to be 1% better every single day. And just having most of this information is a massive leap over the information that we were getting just from our doctor.
Absolutely. It gave us clues, it gave us the right questions to ask, and it gives us some direction. It just wasn't the kind of baseline we had wanted before making bigger changes.
This is also why we made the video on 3 longevity metrics that even Bryan Johnson can't ignore. Because before you hit panic over a messy lab report, you need to know which numbers deserve your attention in the first place. I'm gonna link that below because it pairs perfectly with this video. But first, we need to sort out all the details about which numbers actually held up. So while some of these numbers were contaminated by this dirty draw, there were still a lot of numbers that became very useful because they weren't likely something that was going to be explained away by the dirty draw. Some of the numbers showed some very promising foundational work that I've been doing, and others of it showed that there's still a lot that we need to optimize.
I think your glucose numbers and insulin, A1C, I think they were really solid as metabolic control markers. I think all of your numbers were in a really great range, and these are numbers that would not have collapsed under these messy conditions.
I think one of the things that really surprised me was my omega status.
Mm-hmm.
I have been taking omega supplements for years. I've been taking Barleans, the emulsified fish oils. When I had this test, I was actually taking 2 different fish oil supplements at the time, and
all your sardines.
And I do eat sardines
a lot of
often
sardines
as well, and fish is part of my diet, right? A pretty steady part of our diet. Part of that is that Bryan Johnson's Blueprint and our longevity goals do require a lot more omega in them than what the doctor's standards are. But part of it is that, I have to be more efficient about what supplements I'm actually taking. So
your numbers weren't awful, they just weren't optimized. So that's what the lesson is here, right? A supplement only matters if it's moving the marker. This section gave us 2 different decisions. The blood sugar marker said, keep watching because the foundation may be improving.
Yep.
But your omega number said, stop assuming the supplement is working just because it's in your routine. Taking fish oil is not the same thing as optimizing your omega-3s.
After confusing blood work, this is often where people make one of 2 mistakes. They're either going to ignore the whole report because the draw was messy, or they're going to go changing everything all at once because the numbers scared them. And that's why it was really important that we took a moment to pause and analyze each one of these numbers before we made a big jump, right? The wrong version of this video is, hey, my labs look weird, so we bought every supplement and changed everything.
We were not going to be waiting for perfect data before doing anything though, but we're also not going to panic stack supplements.
Yeah, some of the things that were low regret enough to move on now are things like my cleaner omega-3 strategy. I definitely need to add some more fiber. Again, one of those things that I really thought I was doing a good job on. More legumes, more vegetables. And I think the one that surprised me the most was more consistent electrolytes. I consume a lot of water. I know that I'm always very well hydrated, but I never considered how much of those electrolytes are flowing out of my body along with all that water I'm consuming. And then of course I still have to think about improving my food quality, even though I've been doing that for like the last 10 years now, but 1% better every day, I know.
Yes, our bigger, noisier changes will wait, especially anything that could muddy the next test. APOB and your LDL, they still need respect. We really need a cleaner retest on your hs-CRP. And the next draw has to be done under normal conditions.
We'll be more strict about the rules put in place in the email.
If we change everything at once, the next blood test gets muddy too.
Yeah, very true. So this is where we take a quote-unquote dirty draw that may or may not be useful and make it useful, right? So we have to take and analyze each of these individually and think about what could have been affected by that draw. And we have to be careful with what those numbers could be and how they might be distorted by my sickness, by my fasting, by my hydration, or whatever weird conditions we had out there. But it doesn't mean that we have to throw the whole report away.
Some numbers still gave us clues. Your blood sugar markers gave us a look at the foundation. And omegas gave us insight as to whether the routine was actually showing up in your data.
Yeah, but the bigger lesson was simple. A messy report doesn't mean ignore everything. It means sort harder. What might still be distorted, what teaches us something, and what deserves a cleaner retest before we make a big move.
This blood draw didn't give us the clean baseline we wanted, but it did answer the question that we started with. What can we trust? What should we retest? And what would be a mistake to fix too soon?
We can trust that some things are moving in the right direction, right? My triglycerides, better than they've been in basically an entire decade, maybe longer. Glucose, insulin, A1C, all in good shape. Sure, we need to retest the numbers that were most affected by the context, especially hs-CRP, but I think that it's still something that we can move on from now without having to do a retest right away.
Of course, we need to keep watching your ApoB and your LDL particle number because those still may be a real signal. So no, this wasn't perfect blueprint blood work. It was real life blood work. Messy conditions, useful clues, and a clearer direction than we had before. So that's the real win.
Yeah, I'll take that. I get it. Most people want perfect labs. Believe me, so do I. And I know that disappointing my wife is always my least favorite thing to do. But perfect labs are not just the real prize. The real prize is finally having enough information about my body that I didn't have before. Numbers I had never seen before, and starting to track patterns that I had never tracked before. Questions that I didn't even know that I needed to ask.
And sometimes information that your doctor didn't even have in front of them. That's what this is really about. It's not chasing these perfect scores. It's just taking ownership of your health.
Because once you see the data, you can't unsee it. You can ask better questions and you can make better decisions, and you can stop guessing at everything, but you can't unsee it.
And at age 50,
or approaching 50,
that matters, because the future version of you isn't built by pretending that everything is fine.
So if this blood work taught us anything, it's that not every number deserves the same amount of emotional energy. Some numbers are noise, some are context. Some numbers actually change what you're going to do in your life. So that's why we made a full video on the 3 longevity metrics even Bryan Johnson can't ignore. Because before you panic over one messy lab report, you need to know which numbers deserve your attention in the first place. That's coming up next, right here. Give it a watch.